You don't notice it at first. It starts with small things: tension in your chest when you wake up, rushing through your day with a clenched jaw, the quiet ache of wanting things to be different. You tell yourself you're just being productive, just working hard for what you want. But beneath the surface, something feels off. Your life begins to feel like a performance. You're ticking all the boxes, waking early, setting goals, doing the affirmations, pushing forward. But something inside you is tightening. You keep telling yourself that this is what it takes to succeed, to be happy, to earn peace. But have you ever stopped and asked, what if the reason things aren't flowing isn't because you're not doing enough, but because you're doing too much? There's a kind of suffering that doesn't come from failure, but from force. From gripping too tightly to outcomes. From trying to fix, control, chase, and predict every detail of your journey. And the cruel irony? The more you force life to move, the more it resists you. You meditate, but only to get calm enough to continue chasing. You visualize, but only to demand results faster. You journal, but never to reflect, only to manifest. You've turned your soul into a checklist, and you wonder why the peace never lasts. What Carl Jung understood, and what most of us forget, is that transformation doesn't happen through pressure. It happens through presence. Real change doesn't erupt from force. It emerges in stillness. But stillness is terrifying when your worth has been built on motion. When your self-concept is tied to effort, letting go feels like giving up. Stopping feels like failure. But there comes a moment in every life when the soul rebels, when exhaustion becomes sacred, when silence becomes wisdom, when something inside whispers, you've tried everything except surrender. That's the threshold, not of defeat, but of becoming. Because sometimes the reason life isn't falling into place isn't because it's broken, but because you're gripping too tightly to how you think it should look. And life, real life, doesn't bloom under pressure. It blooms when you release the need to control it. So if you've been forcing, fixing, chasing, pause. This isn't the end of your journey. It's the beginning of your return. To alignment, to clarity, to the version of you that no longer needs to fight to be worthy. Let's begin. There's a difference between movement and progress, between effort and alignment. And most people don't realize they're stuck until they've exhausted themselves chasing what was never meant to be theirs. You see, not every closed door is an invitation to knock harder. Sometimes it's a redirection, a quiet signal that your path is meant to change shape. But when you've built your identity around striving, stopping feels like failure. You don't just question your direction, you start questioning your worth. You tell yourself, if I let go, nothing will happen. If I stop pushing, I'll fall behind. If I don't try harder, I'll lose everything. But here's the truth, the universe doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to presence. It responds to the energy behind your effort. And when your energy is rooted in fear, fear of not being enough, of not having enough, of not becoming enough, then no matter how loud your intentions are, your frequency will speak louder. Stoic wisdom has always pointed us inward. Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. But what if what you have to do is pause? What if the most aligned action isn't action at all, but awareness? Because here's what most people miss. Force is a signal of resistance. When you push too hard, you're often pushing against yourself, against your timing, against your truth. You're trying to bend reality before you've even aligned with it. And yet we idolize force. We glorify the hustle. We mistake burnout for progress and obsession for passion. But real growth doesn't scream, it whispers. Real alignment doesn't chase, it attracts. Think about the strongest people you know. They aren't always the loudest in the room. They don't need to prove. Their strength is subtle, quiet, rooted in self-respect and clarity. That's the kind of presence you're being asked to return to now. Not the one that forces, the one that knows. So here's the challenge. Can you stop fixing? Can you stop proving? Can you stop trying to manifest your way out of discomfort long enough to sit with it? Because that discomfort, it's not your enemy. It's your invitation. It's life holding up a mirror and asking, What part of you still believes you're not enough without the outcome? This isn't about giving up, it's about giving in to truth, to timing, to something deeper than the ego's timeline. And in that surrender, something powerful begins to shift. The weight starts to lift, the mind begins to quiet, the body unclenches, and for the first time in a long time, life begins to move. Not because you forced it, but because you finally aligned with it. You don't realize how loud the noise has been until it stops. The pressure to respond, to fix, to optimize every moment, it becomes your normal. You wake up already behind. You chase clarity by overthinking. You try to heal by controlling. But healing doesn't happen when your nervous system is in a constant state of tension. It happens when the mind softens, when you no longer need the outcome to justify your existence. That's where the Stoics found their power, in stillness, in accepting what they couldn't control and mastering what they could, themselves. Marcus Aurelius didn't write about forcing life. He wrote about flowing with it, observing it, meeting it as it is, not as we demand it to be. He understood that the storm outside only has power if it stirs the storm within. So what happens when you stop forcing? At first, the silence is unnerving. Your thoughts get louder. The old beliefs rise up. You begin to notice how deeply you've tied your worth to motion. But stay with it. Let the silence stretch. Let the stillness settle. Because underneath all that noise is you, the real you, the one who isn't chasing anything, just remembering. You remember how to breathe without urgency. You remember how to act from clarity, not fear. You remember that life isn't a test and you're not failing. You're evolving, quietly, powerfully, without performance. And this evolution doesn't need to be seen to be real. It doesn't need applause or achievement to be valid. In fact, the most profound changes often happen in solitude, in the places no one claps for, in the moments no one sees. That's where your strength is rebuilt, not through more doing, but through deeper being, through sitting in the quiet space between desire and surrender, and choosing not to panic, choosing not to run, choosing to stay. Because life doesn't respond to desperation, it responds to alignment. And when your actions come from a place of peace rather than panic, they begin to carry a different weight. You stop grasping, you stop convincing, you start radiating, and the world feels that shift, even if you never say a word. So let this be your invitation. Not to hustle harder, but to soften more. Not to push for answers, but to hold the questions. Not to manifest with urgency, but to become with grace. You're not falling behind. You're remembering how to move without resistance. You're returning to the rhythm that was always yours. Most people mistake resistance for failure. They think, if it's not happening, I must be doing something wrong. But not everything that delays you is denying you. Sometimes the pause is protection. Sometimes the silence is a sacred space where old identities fall away. And in that space, when nothing seems to move, everything within you is being rearranged. The Stoics called this the discipline of assent, the ability to pause before reacting, to question whether your interpretation is aligned with truth or tinted by fear. Seneca warned us, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And how often have your fears been amplified not by fact, but by force? The more you tried to fix what wasn't broken, the more you broke your own peace. There is a quieter way, one that doesn't beg life to bend, one that doesn't chase meaning in chaos, but meets each moment as it is. It begins with a radical act, doing nothing, not out of laziness, but out of wisdom. You stop meddling, you stop reaching, you stop demanding, and in that stillness you begin to see clearly. You begin to realize that much of what you were chasing was never the thing, it was the feeling. You didn't want the relationship. You wanted to feel seen. You didn't want success. You wanted to feel worthy. You didn't want control. You wanted safety. But here's the paradox. The more you chase the feeling externally, the more it eludes you. Because feelings are not delivered. They are generated, internally, quietly, in stillness. When you stop forcing, you start feeling again. When you stop pushing, your intuition speaks. When you stop proving, your presence expands. And this shift is not theoretical, it's energetic. You don't attract peace by begging for it. You become peace, and peace finds you. You don't manifest clarity by scripting the perfect future. You embody clarity, and the next step reveals itself. This is not passivity, it's precision. It's the choice to stop swinging wildly at life and start aligning intentionally with it. And alignment is rarely loud. It doesn't rush, it doesn't panic, it doesn't compete, it simply knows. And when you begin living from that knowing, the world around you responds, not because you forced it, but because you finally became someone it can respond to. Not a performer, not a controller, but a quiet presence, a grounded soul, a mind no longer at war with itself. This is where life begins to fall into place, not with noise, but with peace. There's a moment in your journey where everything goes quiet, not just on the outside, but within. You no longer crave the noise. You're not addicted to proving. The old rush that once fueled you, chasing answers, refreshing notifications, counting milestones, it starts to feel heavy. You look around and realize the life you were trying so hard to build wasn't wrong. It just wasn't real. It was based on pressure, not peace, on fear, not faith. And so, you begin to release. You let go of the urgency to arrive. You let go of the illusion that more effort equals more alignment. You let go of the belief that you are only worthy when something is happening. And in that letting go, you meet yourself. Not the version of you that's always running, calculating, controlling, but the one beneath all that. The one who's been waiting in the stillness. This is the real test. Can you remain grounded when nothing is happening? Can you hold your truth in the absence of proof? Can you stay aligned without applause, without outcome, without reward? The ego will scream, do something. The soul will whisper, be still. And this is where most people sabotage their own becoming. They mistake silence for stagnation. They call the void empty, not knowing it's sacred. But the Stoics knew better. They saw virtue in waiting. They honored patience not as weakness, but as wisdom. They didn't flinch in uncertainty. They stood in it. Because uncertainty is not chaos, it's possibility. The unknown is not your enemy. It's the container of all potential. So what do you do in the in-between? You breathe, you align, you return to what you can control, your values, your presence, your responses. Instead of seeking signs, you become one. Instead of chasing meaning, you embody it. This is what happens when you stop forcing life to unfold on your schedule. You shift from extraction to expression, from needing to receive to becoming someone who naturally attracts. You're not begging for the door to open. You're becoming the kind of person who isn't afraid of the one that stays closed. That's strength. That's power. That's the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to push to prove. You begin to trust that what's meant for you will not miss you, not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped blocking it. Your resistance was never in the world. It was in you, in the tension, the fear, the frantic grasping. But not anymore. Now you're different. Now you wait, not out of passivity, but out of presence. You act not to chase, but to align. You speak not to fill silence, but to share truth. And life at last begins to echo that change. Not in thunder, but in quiet shifts, in peace returning, in things falling into place on their own. Eventually you come to understand. Peace was never found at the end of striving. It was waiting beneath the noise you thought you needed. There's a hidden cost to constantly forcing things, a cost most people never measure. It's not just the burnout. It's not just the anxiety. It's the way you start losing yourself. Little by little, you abandon your own center for the illusion of progress. You start living in the future, in outcomes, in what-ifs. And somewhere along the way, you stop being present in your own life. But when you finally stop, when you allow space between your thoughts, between your actions, you start to see clearly again. You begin to notice how much of your identity was shaped by pressure. How many of your choices were made from fear disguised as ambition. And that awareness is everything, because you can't shift what you won't see. You can't choose differently if you're still hypnotized by the old story. The one that says you have to earn your worth, prove your value, constantly move just to matter. Carl Jung understood that healing isn't about becoming something new. It's about unbecoming everything you're not. The roles, the masks, the survival patterns, you release them one by one until you remember who you were before the world told you who to be. That's the essence of Stoic clarity. Not detachment from life, but detachment from illusion. Not cold indifference, but clear inner alignment. And once you reach this place, this grounded presence, you begin to live differently. You speak slower, you listen deeper, you respond instead of react. You create without needing to control the outcome. You trust that doing less doesn't mean becoming less. You trust that rest doesn't make you irrelevant. You trust that letting go isn't defeat, it's intelligence. You stop chasing the next thing because you finally feel whole where you are. You stop performing for a world that never knew the real you. You stop asking for permission to slow down. You just slow down and let your life rise to meet you. This is what it means to live without force. You don't collapse in surrender. You rise in silence. You walk lighter, not because the weight disappeared, but because you stopped carrying what was never yours. And now, as the noise fades and the dust settles, you start to feel something unfamiliar, but deeply natural. Calm, clarity, a quiet kind of power, the kind that doesn't announce itself, it simply is. And from that stillness, something begins to happen, not because you demanded it, but because you became ready. You align not just your actions, but your energy. You stopped talking like the person you wanted to be and started living as them. No more bargaining with time. No more chasing signs, no more doubting the path, just presence, just alignment, and life finally falling into place.